Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We'll be starting shortly. Thank you so much for joining us. Yes, Justin? Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And good morning and good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Stay tuned. We are starting shortly. Hello, good evening, Professor Hassan.
Good
Ali
evening.
Hassan. Welcome to the session.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice to be with you.
Thank you.
Hi,
Thank you, Doctor.
Ali.
Hello, Dr. Myra. Good evening.
Hello, Professor Ali. Good evening to you.
Hi, how are you, Professor Ali?
Very
How's
happy
it
to
going?
see
I'm
you,
good.
Dr.
Good.
Ali.
Fine.
Very nice to see you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Tomorrow, shall we start?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. So now it's 18:15 Dubai time. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today in the second part of our four-part symposium entitled Unequal Englishes and Unequal Speakers. A special welcome goes to the symposium co-conveners, Dr. Rouhani Topaz, who teaches at the Department of Culture, Communication and Media, Institute of Education, University College London. He's an associate editor of the International Journal of the Sociology of Language. Professor Saran also is joining us, and she might be a bit late. She is the Director of Academic Affairs at the Hartford campus and Director of Global Education at the Innang School of Education at the University of Connecticut, and Dr. Myra, who serves as the Assistant Dean for Research and Graduate Studies for the College of Education, UAE University. She's also an Associate Professor in the Special Education Department. Today's session is entitled Native Speakerism and Unequal Englishes. I am Aklima. I'll be your host for this session. There will be a 5 to 10 minutes Q&A session after each presentation, so please make sure to write your questions in the chat box. We will make sure to attend to as many questions as we can within the allowed time frame. I would also like to remind you to please follow the ethical code of conduct in this virtual space and to please keep your comments respectful. Also, please feel free to reach out to us in the chat box in case of technical issues. The organizing committee will be happy to help you with that. Finally, there will be special announcements about the attendance certificate and the feedback form towards the end of the session. Please stay tuned for that. As we have two presentations lined up for today, Professor John Gray has sent his welcoming remarks in a video. So Professor John Gray is the co-director for the Center for Applied Linguistics, Institute of Education, University College London. Let us take a few minutes to listen to his remarks.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second session in the Unequal Englishes, Unequal Speakers Symposium. My name is John Gray, and I'm the co-director of the Centre for Applied Linguistics at University College London. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce the second session, which is titled Native Speakerism and Unequal Englishes. Despite years, decades of critique on the part of scholars in applied linguistics and TESOL, these ideas, these concepts remain deeply entrenched in our field. And I think one of the things that today's seminar is hoping to address is, well, the ongoing nature of these problematic concepts and how they might be contested. Now, if we think back to 1990 and perhaps the beginning of the critique of the native speaker that Ben Rampton started in the pages of the English Language Teaching Journal, Rampton wrote, and I'm quoting here from him, "The supremacy of the native speaker keeps the UK and the US at the centre of ELT." Native speakerism, as Adrian Holliday a few years later, also in the pages of the English Language Teaching Journal, pointed out that native speakerism is an ideology that perpetuates the idea of the so-called native speaker, who invariably comes from a very small range of English-speaking countries, that so-called native speaker provides the best model for the English language teacher and the best model for the student of English to aspire to. And of course, we know that such an ideology brings with it enormous benefits to some people and excludes a lot of others. Earlier today, just thinking about this session, I looked at the IELTS website, which states very clearly and much more bluntly than I expected it would, the following: all standard varieties of native English are accepted. This includes Australian English, British English, North American English, and New Zealand English. No mention here of the many varieties of English that those of us who are at the session today speak. No mention, for example, of Irish English, which is the variety that I speak. In a world that's characterized then by ever greater degrees of inequality, here I think we see inequalities being reproduced and reinforced by an English language testing regime that is globally very widely disseminated, and I think most of us would agree is deeply problematic. So to explore the notion of the native speaker and the inequalities associated with it, today we're going to hear from two expert speakers. The first of these is Fajar bin Rashid, who will talk about her own, the ways in which her own linguistic membership has been constantly challenged over time. And we'll also hear from Judas Martinez, who introduces the notion of the half-native speaker. The discussion will be chaired by Ali Shahada, and I hope that you all have a very productive discussion today. Thank you very much.
We thank Dr. John Gray for his kind remarks, and unfortunately he couldn't join us today. Please join me in welcoming the Associate Provost for Research in UAE University, Dr. Ahmed Murad, for his welcome remarks.
Thank you very much. I am delighted today to be with you in this symposium that indicate the importance of the partnership between scientists from the College of Education at the UAE University and other scientists from UCL and also University of Connecticut. UAE University pay attention to the importance of the collaboration especially with the international institution. As you might familiar that UAE University stress also on the importance of cooperating with the international scientists in order, I think, to increase our visibility as a research intensive university with international outlook. During last 5 years, especially the period 2017 to 2022, UAE University, especially the scholars of the UAE University, published around 8,200 papers according to the Scopus data. More than 70% of those publications are due to the international cooperation. UAE University proud to cooperate with more than 4,300 international academic institutions from the different part of the world, indicating how, as university, pay attention to the collaboration, and we encourage our faculty member, I think, to increase their network with the international scientists. I think with sharing the knowledge and experience between different scientists from different parts of the world will improve our understanding to the challenges related to the community, to the education, to overall, I think we are contributing to the advancing the knowledge and advancing the research capability of our institutions. I am pleased also to see our students, our faculty members are contributing to such important events, even with the difference on the time. I see they are taking care of this workshop and this series or symposium in unequal English and equal speaking. I hope that's by the end of this series of symposium we able to develop understanding about how to communicate and how we can, even by our understanding, we can push the research agenda of our institutions, UAE University, UCL, USC, in order, I think, to contribute to the advancement of the world. Without further more, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to Dr. Myra, Assistant Dean for Research and Graduate Studies at the College of Education, and all colleagues behind this series of the symposium. So important things, we engaging our students with the international experience, showing them the best practices in the different field. And as you know, education is considered one of the important national priority for the UAE, and College of Education is contributing to advancement, the knowledge, the advancement, the education system and the ecosystem in the UAE through this collaboration. I wish you all the best, and inshallah at the end, I think we will gain all the experience from this workshop. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Professor Ahmed, for your kind remarks. Now, please join me in welcoming the Dean of the College of Graduate Studies in the UAE University, Dr. Ali Al-Marzouqi, for his welcome remarks.
Thank you. Warm greetings from the College of Graduate Studies at the United Arab Emirates University to all the distinguished guests, students, speakers, faculty members, and participants. I'm Ali Al-Marzouqi, Dean of the College of Graduate Studies. I'm a chemical engineer by discipline. However, because of the nature of my administrative position, I deal with students from all over the world who are English speakers. And so when I saw the title of this symposium, I was really interested to learn about the topic. And I believe it has come at a very good timing. So I'm very pleased to welcome you to this symposium to discuss the topics around unequal Englishes, unequal speakers. I thank you for your participation. I would also like to thank the three universities, namely UCL, UConn, and UAEU, for organizing this important event. Through this meeting, I hope we can engage in a constructive dialogue on this topic. Meetings such as this one is a great opportunity to understand the global perspectives on what are basically the unequal Englishes and who are the speakers. I'm sure it will be a great opportunity for me to learn from you. I would like to thank you again for your participation in this meeting and wish you a very productive discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Ali, for your kind remarks. And now I hand over the session to Professor Ali Shahada, our moderator tonight. Please, Dr. Ali.
Thank you very much, Aklima. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. I hope you can all hear me and see me.
Yes, Dr. Ali.
Yes, Professor, yes.
Okay, great, great. It gives me a huge pleasure to welcome you all to the symposium and to welcome the two featured speakers, our own doctoral student, Fajar Al-Kouz, and our guest speaker, Dr. Judas Martinez, to talk about this topic, like Professor John Gray and Professor Ahmed and Professor Ali mentioned. This is a really hot topic, timely topic, controversial topic passionate topic to many people, including myself. And in fact, it is one of my own research areas of interest. So it is absolutely a timely topic to talk about it today. The two featured speakers today, like I mentioned, they will talk about this Englishes, unequal Englishes and equal speakers. And the topic for the symposium today, session 2 today, is native speakerism and unequal Englishes. The first speaker, it is my pleasure to introduce to you the first speaker, Ms. Fajer bin Rashid. Fajer bin Rashid, Fajer Al-Kouz, I call her, this is how we know her in our doctoral degree program. Fajer is passionate about the topic. She has strong views about the topic and including other topics, multilingualism, multiculturalism, English language literacy, in addition to literature and translation. So Fajer has a number of hats to put on. And like I said, she has strong views about that. She was with me on 2 doctoral courses. And of course, she enriched the discussion in terms of quantity and quality. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome you, Fajer, and the floor is yours. What we have 25 minutes for each speaker, and it would be good to have the discussion at the end, 15 to 20 minutes. And I think that would be good, unless you have a burning question to ask the speaker immediately after his or her speech. All right. So Fajer, the floor is yours. You have 25 minutes starting from now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ali. I'm very humbled by your introduction, and I'm very, very happy to be here with everybody else. I'm going to start timing myself. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I have entitled my presentation, Shared Epiphanies of My Constantly Challenged Linguistic Membership. This presentation is based on a recent study, a recent autoethnographic study that I have written. So it will take us back to the time when my thoughts about linguistic ownership and membership were first challenged and eventually altered. Like I said, since it is based on a recent study that I have conducted, I'm going to take you through the introduction, the theoretical framework, the epiphanies and the reflection of them, and then finally the conclusion. So let's start with the introduction. Under the umbrella of unequal Englishes, linguistic equality has been critically viewed as unearthing the configurations of power and social relations between groups of speakers. Unequal relations of power among social groups are organized based on race, gender, class, and other factors. By demonstrating the inequalities of Englishes, scholars like the ones mentioned on this slide shed light on the divide between the romanticized, the utopian, and the apolitical images of globalizing the English language and the intergroup conflicts which often arise from the unequal access to English language learning due to socioeconomic factors. To explain, I think unequal Englishes as a phenomenon and as a field rightfully doesn't romanticize the equality of Englishes, considering that their, and I quote, political legitimacies are uneven, end of quote. In Kuwait, the spread of English use was a result of establishing reconfigured imperial relations during the British protectorate era. I call these relations reconfigured because upon examining the wider context of British imperialism, it becomes clear that Britain's approach with its other imperial dependencies differs from the way it dealt with Kuwait. This is simply because in Kuwait, the need for protection made its approach to Britain more complex. Yet, Britain's reconfigured imperial relations with Kuwait could not be achieved in an ideological vacuum, to quote Lowenstein. Mediated by language ideologies, the English language has settled Kuwait's local linguistic ecology since the British protectorate era. The spread, however, is presently sustained by the imposition of colonial practices and ideologies through contemporary processes of capitalist globalization. To this day, Kuwaiti Arabic, Kuwait's heritage language, remains influenced by the continuous mobility of English, with some of its words appropriated in it. And I'm going to show you some examples now. For instance, words like late and condition are appropriated from the English language in Kuwaiti Arabic to mean what their equivalent words in English mean, light and air conditioner. The appropriation of English words in Kuwait's heritage language is thus considered as an example of using English in hybrid ways to express the Kuwaiti Arab identity. Yet, I argue that the pluralization of English in Kuwait's nuanced experience is not merely a linguistic or structural transformation of the language, but more crucially, a mechanism to consciously or otherwise facilitate globally shaped local power relations between native and non-native groups of speakers, rendering it unequal. Within the Kuwaiti context, speaking English has often been consciously and otherwise driven by the possibility of gaining access to international linguistic memberships, ones that couldn't have been otherwise offered by Kuwaiti Arabic or Standard Arabic alone. In other words, speaking English in Kuwait is theoretically and practically assumed to enable its speakers to attain linguistic memberships to imagined communities. The English-speaking club is then an imagined community in this case, and in the sense that its members, and I quote, will never know most of their fellow members, meet them, or even hear of them, yet in the minds of each lives the image of their communion, end of quote. Hence, the reimagining of linguistic membership is argued to often reside in the minds of bilingual Kuwaiti speakers. Yet debates about bilingual experiences often encompass questioning the legitimacy of their native speakerism in English. Personally, the idea of becoming a member of an international linguistic club has been ironically challenged by alleged native speakers of the language in places of education, such as universities, conferences, and others alike. While imagined communities are explained to negotiate local ways of belonging to broader identity memberships, the problematic and essentialist positioning of bilingual English language speakers within a deficit model, which is often induced by native speakerism ideologies, is observed to interrupt the organic formation of such communities. What it means is that framing bilinguals' linguistic competency within a deficit in which their competency is constantly questioned and challenged contributes to the native, non-native dichotomy between groups of the English speakers. Such problematic framing also unearths of the configurations of power and social relations between speakers as a result of perpetuating ideological legacies of native speakerism. Hence, Anderson's imagined community concept with its latter expansion and Philipson's native speaker fallacy constituted the framework that guided my study. The integration of a critical approach into this auto-ethnographic study helped explore the unequal dynamics between native and non-native English-speaking teachers. So let's move on to look at the theoretical framework more closely. Anderson argues that nations are anthropologically defined as, and I quote, imagined political communities, imagined as both inherently limited and sovereign, end of quote. Anderson explains that even the largest of nations have fixed boundaries. More importantly, Anderson argues that a nation is imagined because it is a fraternity that is, and I quote, always conceived as a deep horizontal comradeship, end of quote. Similarly, Derrida examines the concept of fraternity as a mechanism for identification and inclusion, in which it is postulated that differences between apparent non-brothers, like women in this example, are neutralized. In light of this, I wrote in a previous study, and I quote myself, here the word brother signifies the relationship between siblings that share the common archetype humanity, end of quote. As a result, including women as non-brothers in a fraternity becomes possible despite the imposed phallocentric limitations of it. Such limitations render non-brothers, however, like women, voiceless, absent in discourse, and with no acknowledgement within such a phallocentric society. This means although a nation could be celebrated as a fraternal community with the implication of comradeship, it is still rendered limited. Thus, while describing a nation as both limited and fraternal could be understood as a paradox, it is true to reality. Wenger posits, and I quote, "We define who we are by negotiating local ways of belonging to broader constellations and of manifesting broader styles and discourses," end of quote. Norton and Pavlenko similarly examine membership in imagined communities relevant to the English language as lingua franca. Their insightful account challenges the problematic positioning of English language learners as marked identities within a deficit model. Similarly, essentialist notions of speakerism have often excluded non-native speakers from the native-speaking fraternity. In addition to being a passionate researcher myself, I am also an avid reader of fiction and nonfiction books, and Dr. Myra knows of this. So while reading Richard Rodriguez's 1982 Hunger of Memory, The Education of Richard Rodriguez over summer, I surprisingly found multiple thematically relevant statements articulating linguistic membership, ownership, and ownership. So I highly recommend reading his memoir if you're interested in the topic. So moving on to linguistic discrimination, I want to first say that, simply put, the native speaker fallacy holds the assumption that the ideal teacher of English must be a native speaker. More importantly, native speakerism is assumed as a result of, and I quote, "a correspondence between holding the citizenship of a nation state and being a native speaker of the national language of that nation state," end of quote. The correspondence between one's citizenship and native speakerism, however, questionably and problematically supposes the homogeneity of languages and their speech communities, which is unrealistic. The native speaker tenet is unfortunately practiced in Kuwait in the form of teaching job advertisements demanding the need for native speakers of English. As a result, English varieties associated with inner circle countries become the only legitimate models of the language. In Kuwait, it specifically reflects the consequences of a historical alliance with Britain and America, which has then in turn influenced the orientation of English language pedagogy within the country. Moving on to autoethnography, I want to first quote Ellis and colleagues who define autoethnography as an approach that systematically analyzes personal experience to understand a larger cultural experience. Rather than mainly adhering to canonical research norms, turning to autoethnography or ethnography has allowed numerous scholars to attain an alternative mode of research deemed as subversive in its ability to challenge the borders of the canon. This is because through systematically analyzing one's personal experience, autoethnography is able to shed light on personal and identity narratives that have otherwise been labeled as nonconformist by alienating research practices. Part of doing autoethnography is to, and I quote Alice and colleagues, is to retrospectively and selectively write about epiphanies that stem from or are made possible by being part of a culture and or possessing a particular cultural identity, end of quote. I deem writing epiphanies as a form of autoethnography fitting for my study. This is because it allowed me to better understand my linguistic ownership as a fundamental aspect of my cultural identity. Reflecting on the shared epiphanies allowed me to understand how my personal life intersects with a larger community, i.e. with other participants who speak the same languages in my repertoire. So I'll take you now through my two epiphanies. My two epiphanies resemble local and global backdrops of the same experience. The first, entitled A Racially CCQ, which stands for Concept Checking Questions in the CELTA world, recounts one of my first experiences in which my ability to speak English is questioned by a legitimately native speaker of the language. It retells a recurring encounter with a former work superior. This epiphany epitomizes a local practice of employing English consciously or otherwise as a mechanism for facilitating globally shaped local power relations between native and non-native groups of speakers. In other words, it describes a local example of rendering the use of English as unequal between a presumed native speaker of the language and myself, a Celt, a Kuwaiti English language teacher. Near native is the title of my second epiphany, in which challenging my linguistic membership to the ELTC, or the English language teaching community, is experienced on a global stage, surpassing the locality that portrays the first epiphany. In other words, the second epiphany describes the perpetuation of challenging my linguistic membership based on ideological legacies of native speakerism outside the Arab world. It dates back to a time when I had just finished presenting my paper in English in a conference hall in Europe. So I'm going to read out to you the epiphany I wrote, which I have entitled A Racially Charged CCQ. During my 13-year teaching experience, I had the pleasure of being mentored by a number of well-experienced educators and supervisors, one of whom was a presumed native speaker whose English epitomized the inner circle model of the language. She was my supervisor during my early teaching years. I remember her constantly checking my understanding after assigning me work tasks. She would simply ask, "Do you understand?" after each one of her requests, be it straightforward or complex. During that time, I realized that the same question was never asked of my native English-speaking colleagues, whom she also supervised. It might not have been done intentionally, but it was done. I never questioned her practice out loud. Maybe it was because I wanted to spare us the awkward confrontation. Maybe because I didn't want to question my superior, or maybe it was the combination of both. Daily encounters with the other, like in the first epiphany, sharpen the dichotomous lines between nativeness and non-nativeness, and question my in-betweenness. Norton defines identity as how people can understand the relationship to the world, their relationship to the world. Similarly, Sabata Dalmau writes, and I quote, "I conceptualize identity as social categorization practices mediated through and constituted in situated communicative events," end of quote. However, my linguistic identity was constantly, overtly and covertly questioned, and hence condemned by my work superior or supervisor, making my or our shared English language a tool for exclusion and for regulating membership to its linguistic systems and cultures. Thus, similar encounters also mainly indicate a lack of solidarity in the ELTC. I remember feeling embarrassed during such encounters, as well as doubtful of my own ability to speak the language. Simply put, I felt that my English language wasn't enough, and hence I felt I wasn't enough. Moreover, reflecting on the encounter now, I feel disappointed that I never pointed that out to her. I now feel upset over my docility, which came as a result of indirectly and continuously experiencing stereotyping. I now regret not expressing my feelings whenever the same encounter would repeat, as we could have had an honest conversation about how I felt and about the implied power relationship that was at play. So I'll take you now to my second reflection. I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to read over the encounter. Please note that the author, or A, stands for me in the encounter. So I am the author in this encounter. I froze for a minute after the encounter, and for the rest of the day, I kept asking myself, would she praise a presumed native speaker of the English language for their English after their conference presentation? It was only after this incident that I started to reflect on my identity as a speaker of the English language in light of the native-non-native dichotomy and its membership to the wider linguistic community around the world and not just locally in Kuwait. To many, such an interaction is regarded as legitimate, And in some cases, praises about one's language abilities are considered to be courteous and considerate. Yet it caught me completely off guard, as I felt her commenting on my English language ability was more pressing and more relevant than to comment on the ideas discussed in my presentation. The native speaker fallacy concept is at play here, definitely at play here, which stems from ideologies of exclusion. Using expressions like, "you sound like a native," is an example of microaggression, where the conference attendee intentionally or otherwise passed stereotypical and prejudicial judgment toward a culturally different speaker of English. For those who are not familiar with microaggressions, microaggressions are defined as intentional or unintentional, verbal or nonverbal, derogatory or negative messages targeting marginalized people, stereotyping or questioning, questioning bilinguals and their ability to speak English, whether through praises and negative remarks. That could be an example of microaggression. Reflecting on the encounter now makes me feel bitter about how my identity as a cult was and probably is still perceived by the other. It is evident that I'm perceived as an outsider, whose English skills are reason for praise rather than for linguistic inclusion. What is problematic is that praises of such are observed to never be directed to presumed native speakers of the English language, regardless of the fact that they actually differ in their English language abilities and skills. Moreover, thank you, sir. Thank you. So, moreover, experiencing linguistic stereotyping in social and academic life is noted to cause a lack in one's sense of belonging and solidarity in the ELTC world. So I'll take you now to the conclusion. And I wanted to shed light on the great Langston Hughes and his poem, Harlem, which is also known as Dream Deferred. While Hughes' Harlem doesn't directly speak about a dream of equal Englishes, I shed light on it as a backdrop to a deferred dream of uniting Englishes, which has in turn driven a member of scholars like Dr. Wari Tupas, who was a co-convener of the symposium, to question the unequal and the unjust discourses and practices through which the English language is used around the world. Yet this deferred dream of equal Englishes doesn't necessarily have to dry up, fester, stink, sag, or even explode. Equal Englishes could instead displace nation states from the center of world narrative, thus displacing Anglo countries at the center of world narrative, and examine the cultural implications behind the spread of canonical models of the language. By choosing to speak the languages in my linguistic repertoire, I aim to subscribe to a linguistic membership hoped to accommodate to mobility, diversity, and new cultural possibilities. Before I end my presentation, I want to talk about the significance of engaging in autoethnography. This autoethnographic study is significant for three main reasons. Firstly, it demonstrates the relevance and importance of understanding oneself as a researcher within one's context and outside of it as part of their narrative interpretation. Secondly, it provided the space to describe one of my many subjective realities through thoughts and feelings and through objective analysis. Finally, autoethnography also helped me to reflect on my personal biases as an educator. For instance, teaching through the use of my social, cultural, religious, economical, and/or political frames of reference might sometimes have led me to practice unintentional favoritism in class, especially when selecting teaching content or teaching discussion topics. Therefore, reflecting on similar encounters empowers educators like myself and equips them with the necessary tools to examine the presentation of their own standard cultures in the classroom. How that might leave students from other cultures feeling alienated and less valued, and how that could sustain unequal power dynamics in teaching and learning. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Please feel free to reach out to me via email or on my LinkedIn page. These are my references. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Fajar. That was absolutely wonderful. A, on time, and B, you have touched upon a number of issues: theoretical, professional, personal, linguistic, non-linguistic, ideological. I'm sure the audience, the attendees, will have a lot to talk about and to ask you, but it would be good to leave questions until we hear from Julius. All right, if you don't mind.
Of course.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's absolutely wonderful.
I
It
can't
is
wait
my
to hear it.
pleasure. That's a great. Absolutely. That is wonderful, Fajar. All right. So please keep your questions and challenges and comments and feedback on Fajar's presentation. That is absolutely full with information, with ideas, with challenging views, which is a great. It's my pleasure to move on and invite Dr. Judas Martinez to talk about his topic, that is half native English speaker. But again, Judas, you need to tell us about the other half. All right. Uh, Judas Martinez is associate professor in the Faculty of International Studies at Niigata University for International and Information Studies in Japan. His fields of interest are again and widely relevant to English language education, varieties of English, lingua franca, multilingualism, translingualism. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you Julius, and Julius, the floor is yours to talk about the half-native English speaker. The floor is yours, Julius.
All right. Thank you. Can I be heard? Yes.
Yeah, I
Okay.
can hear you.
Hi, hello. Good evening to everybody. And before I start, I'd like to thank Ruwani Tupas for first inviting me to this wonderful symposium and share with you one of the works that I have done in the past that is closely connected with the theme Unequal Englishes and native speakerism. It's also very nice to meet new colleagues here like Roda, Ali, Fajar, Eklima, and Aisha, and to the rest who are present here today. And I hope we can all meet in person in the future. My lecture today is about a half-native English speaker, and it's actually partly drawn from my one of my works published in Asian Englishes back in 2020, and it's entitled A New Hierarchy of English Teachers, the Half-Native English Teacher as a Neoliberal, Racialized, and Gendered Subject. In my lecture today, I hope to achieve the following aims. So first, I'd like to illustrate to everybody the multimodal manner in which a website of an online English school in Japan projected a new hierarchy of English speakers. Second, I'd like to demonstrate that the half-native English speaker category or the label reinforces old and familiar and problematic discourses. And then third, I'd like to analyze the neoliberal, the racialized and gendered constructions of half-native English speakers. And finally, I'd like to discuss the implications of the half-native label on the ways we can further study unequal Englishes. All right, so let's get started. The label called half-native English speaker appears in the website of an online English school called Universal Speaking. This online school was registered as a company in 2015 with business offices in Canada, the Philippines, and Japan. And the students in this school are Japanese, coming from different age groups. Let me now examine or show to you the different sections of the website. In this section, the Universal Speaking presents three categories of English teachers. A Japanese teacher labeled as bilingual is for students who are not good at English. The second type, a Filipino teacher labeled as half-native, and is for those who have acquired a good level of proficiency and want to sustain that level at a low price. A Canadian teacher labeled as a native speaker is for those who have an advanced level of proficiency. These three categories become more vivid when we look at this section, where we can see real-life images of the Japanese, Filipino, and Canadian teacher. Below the images are characteristics that define each type of teacher. So the left column consists of an image of a female Japanese teacher with a light skin tone, She can teach beginner level English and can help students prepare for standardized examinations like ACAN and TOEIC. The middle column consists of an image of a female Filipino teacher who is brown-skinned, and she can teach English conversation at a low price. And she can also teach business English and can make classes fun. The right column consists of an image of a white and male Canadian teacher, and he can teach advanced level English. He can also teach those who want to work or study overseas. The real life models are cartooned in this section of the website. So the visual depictions are almost the same, like a light-skinned female Japanese teacher, a white and blonde male Canadian teacher, and a dark-skinned female Filipino teacher. Through multimodal critical discourse analysis, I started the data and analyzing the data by paying attention to the layout. So if you notice in the main sections of the website, the categories of English teachers are delineated in a 3-column table without comparative slippages. So the characterizations are so absolute. They are very highly specific to each type of teacher, and they are also neither overlapping nor mutual. The layout is also complemented with different word choices that can be grouped under 5. The nationality trope, like Japanese, Filipino, Canadian, the nativeness trope, like native, half native, the proficiency trope, like high, average, low, the learning purpose trope, like the beginner English, business English, and the economic value trope, low price and cheap. So when describing a type of teacher, universal speaking deploys linguistic resources along the lines of nationality, nativeness, proficiency, learning purpose, and the economic value. The tropes become more perceptible when visual resources are factored in. The models are depicted as female and male professionals with distinct skin tones, which further straitjacket teachers according to race and gender. And the tropes are further visualized through the use of the cartoon images I showed to you earlier, where gender and racial archetypes can be seen. It appears from this that universal speaking, the school does not only describe, but also prescribe what teachers look like, how much their labor is, and the tasks that they can do. The linguistic and non-linguistic resources that the company used in the website are orchestrated in a very compartmentalized way. And this orchestration projects a particularly striking hierarchy of English teachers. At the pinnacle of the hierarchy is the white and the male native speaker, and positioned in the middle of the hierarchy is the half-native teacher, and situated at the bottom of the chain is the local non-native speaker. Now, prevalent in the literature about native and non-native English speakers is the juxtaposed idealized nativeness view. As the name suggests, this lens or this view juxtaposes native and non-native English speakers in terms of what each can or cannot do. We have seen a lot of studies like this, like studies comparing native and non-native teachers, arguing non-native teachers having distinct personal and professional characteristics that make them as capable as native teachers. However, I argue that this kind of view is a little bit problematic because the view of comparing native and non-native, it has a tendency to address inequality by glorifying the value of non-native English speakers. So thus, it reinforces idealization and essentialization as if non-native speakers are a homogeneous group, So moreover, this view points to the strength of the non-native English teachers in using the students' first languages. So this gives the impression that non-native teachers are local teachers only. So it leads to the othering of non-local teachers within the category of non-native English teachers. So for instance, here in Japan, where I work, I identify myself as a non-native English speaker. However, here in Japan, a non-native English speaker is a Japanese because they speak the children's mother tongue, or they speak the mother tongue. So in other words, like in that particular category, okay, I am not considered like a non-native speaker, even though I am a non-native speaker. So within that category, there are different layers. There are still different layers, and such layers are again compared and juxtaposed. So this practice of comparing and juxtaposing native and non-native speakers, it never ends, So sometimes I used to ask like, oh, so what now? Like, when will this end? Like comparing and juxtaposing and, idealizing native and non-native speakers. A significant observation to make here is that the use of the word half-native to identify and describe Filipino teachers, the lexical choice is novel, considering that there's really no such word, in the vast literature about native and non-native English teachers, right? So the traditional hierarchy in the literature is this binary, so it's native versus non-native binary. But while this hierarchy looks new, old discourses of idealization and binary juxtapositions remain in place. Universal speaking has created an idealized half-native speaker, which is a category juxtaposed with more familiar and yet problematic categories of idealized native speaker and idealized non-native speaker. And what shapes this practice of creating idealized categories of English speakers is native speakerism, right? So this powerful ideology is the underlying mindset that reproduces questionable practices of idealizing and categorizing English speakers. As previously mentioned, the linguistic and visual resources in the website convey recurring themes of market value, race, and gender. And this indicates that Filipino teachers, as well as Canadian and Japanese teachers, are conceived in the discourses of neoliberalism, race, and gender. The most conspicuous manifestation of neoliberal discourses that construct the half-native identity is the explicit declaration on the website that Filipino teachers can be availed of at a cheap price. So among the three categories of teachers, only half-native speakers have been explicitly and repeatedly marketed along the lines of affordability. So the Canadian and Japanese teachers are not described in that manner. Selling Filipinos as cheap half-native speakers can be used as a strategy for market saturation. Having a cheap half-native teacher in the company has become an available option for the Japanese students who cannot afford expensive English courses. It is also an attempt to saturate a wider market. So half-native teachers are sold not only to Japanese customers who are financially comfortable, but also to those who are economically disadvantaged. Furthermore, marketing half-native English speakers as cheap teachers can be used for market distinction. Companies focus on what can make them more distinct from the rest of the industry and leading them to add value to their products. So to carve a niche in a highly competitive English language teaching industry, the half-native is introduced in the market, adding value to the products of universal speaking. So in short, half-native speakers provide cachet to a company, allowing it to have a niche market. Half-native speakers are also depicted on the website as highly racialized subject. The visual representation of half-native speakers as brown and dark-skinned Filipinos, while may be inoffensive to some is not without problems. So first, it's a misleading and overgeneralizing representation. Second, the image of a brown Filipino has a history of use and abuse. During the American colonization of the Philippines from 1898 to 1946, the Americans called Filipinos brown monkeys and other racial slurs. Moreover, here in Japan, there is a long history of differentiating between people by race and skin color. During the Meiji era, a period where Japan was priming itself as a colonial power, there was a dominant belief that societies composed of persons with white skin are at the highest stage of civilization, while those societies of persons with dark skin are at the lowest stage. And this kind of mindset has traces in contemporary Japanese society. In fact, in several domains at the moment, such as workplaces and the media, foreigners with dark skin like me are associated with crime, poverty, and villainy. As gendered subjects, half-native speakers are pictured as young and pretty Filipinas who can make Japanese students forget about class time. And such attributes have a potential appeal to male Japanese students who learn English not for language development, but for romantic or sexual desires. And this kind of observation is not unfounded. In fact, there's another study by Tajima. Tajima investigated the blog entries of male Japanese students that are posted on several online English schools with predominantly female teachers from the Philippines. And what Tajima found, the male students used numerous expressions in their blogs, such as cute, well-proportioned as a model, and young, to describe their Filipina teachers. So it's not surprising then to encounter some male Japanese students who choose Filipina teachers on the basis of their physical looks. So these multimodal constructions of the half-native English speaker in the website illustrate how inequality between speakers of Englishes intersects with broader discourses of neoliberalism, race, and gender. And this is very evident in the hierarchization of English teachers on the website, which is constantly reworked and reconfigured through simultaneous neoliberalizing and gendering and racializing processes. In other words, unequal Englishes cannot be understood without looking at the ways inequality is tied with the global and the local conditions of class, race, and gender. The foregoing discussion that I made has implications for investigating unequal Englishes. And I think the implications I am about to say are important, especially if you want to conduct studies within the lens of unequal Englishes in the future. So in my study about half-native speakers, I employed a multimodal critical discourse analysis to look and probe my data. MCDA is a descendant of the more familiar critical discourse analysis. A criticism against critical discourse analysis is that it analyzes the linguistic resources or the words in a text only. MCDA, on the other hand, analyzes both linguistic and non-linguistic resources in a text. So there's a move from words to non-linguistic resources like images or the layout or the color or the sound. So all of them are all taken into consideration. And so this turn to MCDA was a result of recent work in multimodality, this kind of approach to communication that thinks that representation and communication always draws on a multiplicity of modes. Resources are socially and culturally shaped over time, and that people make meanings by selecting and configuring different linguistic and non-linguistic resources. So MCDA conceives of different texts like a website as an interaction of multiple semiotic resources. The discussion we had earlier suggests that MCDA has the methodological potential to spotlight the structural nature of unequal Englishes. The analysis of linguistic and non-linguistic resources that I made allowed me to detect native speaker ideology as responsible for the making and reproduction of unequal Englishes. The making and reproduction occur within the dynamics of an online English school, which is a profitable linguistic market of native and non-native Englishes, where the former acts as a linguistic capital. So the manner by which native English takes on as the legitimate form of teaching English in online English schools is done through unequal valuations of teachers with different Englishes who come into the industry. So thus, through MCDA, we can learn about the nature of unequal Englishes itself. It is inequality between speakers of Englishes that is systematically caused by the notoriously powerful native speaker ideology. There is a dearth of research on investigating unequal Englishes through the lens of MCDA. So aside from my study, another recent work that has put the study of unequal Englishes through MCDA to the fore is Morikawa and Parba. Certainly, more and more. Sure. Okay. So that engage. All right. So engage in multimodal and equal Englishes. So I hope that you can look further into these studies and look into more. So to conclude, I hope that I achieved the following aims, like illustrating the multimodal manner in which this website projected a new hierarchy of English teachers. I also hope that I demonstrated how problematic half-native English speaker is and the different constructions of the half-native English speaker. And I hope that I was able to achieve discussing the implications of the half-native label on the ways we can further study unequal Englishes. So yeah, that's it from me. Thank you very much. In Tagalog, maraming salamat po. In Japanese, arigato gozaimashita.
Perfect. Thank you very much. All on time, Judas. Absolutely, it took 20 minutes. Again, you spoke about varieties of English, the problems of labeling, categorizing people, the hierarchy, and native, full native, half native. It is highly controversial, but very interesting. So interesting. Okay, that's great, wonderful. Thank you very much, speakers, both speakers. We have a number of questions, and we have 15 minutes for the Q&A. And I'm gonna read them to you and see who will go first and answer, and depending on where the questions will go. And because we have a number of questions, it would be good to have quick answers, please. All right, the first question is from Breda O'Hara Davis. What would you suggest? I think this was initially for Fajar. What would you suggest could be done to recognize varieties of English as identity expressions in the face of ongoing references to assessment like the IELTS gatekeepers? So any suggestions, because you have gatekeepers for IELTS and assessment and, against the competence of the native speaker.
I think.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Just to answer very quickly, I think the issue with that, like, assessments like IELTS and TOEFL, it goes back to my hope to displace nation states from world narrative, from the center of world narrative, really, if I may say that. So once you displace Anglo countries, at the center of that world narrative, you'll be able to allow for other varieties of English to, be available as well, and be celebrated. So I guess it all goes back to my hope to displace nation states from, the standard world narrative.
Good, but when you have gatekeepers like IELTS and the TOEFL exam and the people and the money behind it, how can you displace them?
I think what makes them gatekeepers is the idea that they are at the center of world narrative. So once we do that, once we shed light on the inequality of the power dynamics and the power relations between the speakers of that language, then we'll be able to start the conversation or even continue, because I know the conversation started many years ago. So we'll be able to help and contribute in allowing them, because we don't want to, paint a picture of them as evil people. We just want them to, we want to help them understand that this is how we feel and this is how we think things should be in terms of Englishes.
Thank you, Fajar. We need to resist and say this is not right. All right, this is how things must go at the end of the day. Good. The second question is from Jeffrey De Castro, I believe directed to Julius. The notion of native speakerism is already problematic, true, controversial. Considering the oversaturated ESL market industry, how do you think the half-native speakers must construct and negotiate their identity as English teaching professionals between the lines of the privileged and marginalized? Would like me to read it again, or
can you read it again, please?
Okay.
Thank you, Daddy.
So Jeffrey is saying that the notion of native speakerism is already problematic. True. So considering the oversaturated, filled ESL market industry, how do you think the notion of half native speakers must be constructed and negotiated? How they negotiate their identity as English teaching speakers between the lines of the privileged and people who are marginalized. So in the middle, where do we stand? How to negotiate your position?
All right, it's a very interesting question. We still have this notion that binary, still a binary, like native speakers privileged and non-native speakers marginalization. Okay, but that is already being contested because you see, like in this industry that we all go, like the ELT industry, for instance, half native teachers, for example, sometimes they can be privileged and they also sometimes on certain occasions can be marginalized. For example, as in the journal article that that I showed to you earlier, one of my Filipino participants said that she was privileged because the school, that some Japanese students, they want a Filipino teacher. They want a Filipino teacher, and they don't want an American or a British speaker. Okay, because Filipino teachers have a very clear pronunciation or whatever that means, So yeah, so in that sense, like they are privileged, okay, because as a Filipino, like that kind of racialized construction, okay. So the lines of privilege and marginalization are so fluid. And this native and non-native thing and the half-native, okay, it's also very fluid, and it doesn't always mean that when you are a non-native, you are always marginalized. So, and it doesn't always mean that when you are a native speaker, okay, you are always privileged. You see, now these kinds of constructs our experiences are not categorical. Like we can always experience different, ways of being privileged and marginalization, depending on our race, depending on our gender, depending on so many factors. So yeah, that's one thing about, the scholarship about native and non-native speakers now, that there's a very fluid line, between marginalization and privilege. So yeah, we really cannot say it anymore. Yeah. I hope I answered the question.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Good. But this is an ongoing discussion. The following question is for you, Fajar, by anonymous attendee asking about, you are willing to challenge that, but how Kuwait is willing, as a country to challenge and promoting the supremacy of the native speaker people from the inner circle. So when you go, professionally beyond, this is a rather lengthy question, but I'm summarizing this one. So to look at the Minister of Education, Minister of Higher Education, teaching there, why the circle? To what extent people there are willing to challenge that, the supremacy, and promoting only native speakers, for example, can apply in Kuwait?
I think an interesting observation about that, and I think those who are joining from Kuwait could probably agree. Linguistic discrimination is often mostly noted in private places. So in private schools and private universities. But if you look at the number of people Kuwaiti teachers who are teaching, for example, who are teaching English in Kuwait University, it's a different case. I was taught by mostly Kuwaitis in Kuwait University. So, but Unequal Englishes takes, because I don't want to defend the governmental sector of education in Kuwait, because I want to be honest. I want to say that unequal Englishes takes a different form in such institutions, because what happens is that they would only, for example, hire faculty members that have graduated from inner circle countries to teach English in such institutions. So I think I really like that question. This is a very important question to start a conversation about unfair practices towards Kuwaitis who, for example, did not really study abroad, or don't wish to study abroad because it's not something, it's not a must to do it really abroad. If you do it, that's great, but if you don't, that's also great. So I think it takes different forms within the Kuwaiti scene. And again, to answer that question very, very quickly, I must say that people in higher places should really sit down with the new generation of educators, because I feel us, the new generation of educators, and I'm very happy to have a lot of my colleagues from Kuwait joining today. And, we all speak about the same topic, really. We're all, all of our competencies get challenged every day. So we all feel the same thing. I'm not the only ones, whose membership gets challenged every day. So maybe our voices, the young people of Kuwait, could be heard more seriously by people in higher places for changes to happen in Kuwait.
Okay, good. The following question is again for you, Fajr, and the one after for Julius. All right. So again, this is by anonymous attendee, another person. Fajr, do you think your position, Fajr, as an English language instructor imposes more stress on you because it extends from language to professional judgments? So do you think that your position as language instructor imposes more stress on you because this goes from being language issue to professional judgment issue?
For sure, 100%. And I think my first epiphany epitomizes that. In real life, in my normal encounters with people who are native speakers of the English language, I never get the question, do you understand? Ever in my life, never got that question. But as a professional in the English field, I got it. I got that question. So it definitely adds a challenge, really, different, another layer. And I remember in my early years, in my formative teaching years, I remember, because I also served as an advisor, so I remember meeting a lot of parents, Kuwaiti parents, demanding for the money that they're paying to a private university, that their children's English teachers must be English or American or Australian, people coming from the inner circle countries, really. So yes, for sure, definitely. It definitely adds a different layer. And just to reiterate Dr. Julius's point about not being marginalized all the time, that's for sure, because in the Kuwaiti society, I am considered as a privileged person just because I speak more than one language in my repertoire. But in my educational field, which I spoke about, my membership gets challenged, which is very surprising, but also I guess I understand why. It's because of those legacies of native speakerism.
Okay, thank you, Fajar. And the following question is for both of you, for you in particular, Julius, again, going back to gatekeepers, exams, high stakes exams. So how do we dismantle the myth of universal English in contexts that rely on high stakes assessments that focus on particular on correctness and native speakerism? So if that's the ultimate goal, to focus on correctness, native speakerism, and high stakes exams really follow that kind of paradigm. So how to dismantle this myth? So Julius, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's because I'm very wary answering such questions, actually, because I might be just giving lip service, you know what I mean, right? Because dismantling the myth has been going on for so many decades. Like a lot of people have written about it, a lot of scholars have written about it, and still we are still in this kind of in this kind of environment. So I really have no idea how to dismantle that. But I think one way of dismantling that myth is to always challenge that myth. Okay,
True,
like
true.
as scholars, as scholars and as teachers, okay, we have to continuously challenge that myth. Okay, and that's one of the things that I'm looking, like in looking forward to. Like in terms of other ways of dismantling, I really have no idea. But me as a scholar, from my experience, like just to challenge that and to contest, I think that is one way of dismantling the myth.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Judas. I agree. I think there are a number of scholars have been challenging that. Of course, they are the speakers, not me. But people like Saurish Kanagaraja, like Rampton, like Philipson, and others, and Ahmar Mahbub, and others, they have been challenging, and their voices are being heard, including my own research. So really to say, wait, we need to reconsider things. There are lots of myths. All right, here we have another question, probably again directed to you both, by Roland Anthony Imperial. Many linguists and language educationalists describe native speakerism as a myth. Again, back to myth. But this myth obviously has real-world consequences for language minorized communities. Do you think we should abandon the ideology of native speakerism and linguistics and language education research? And in other words, should we reconceptualize how we view systems of inequality in language education to better understand why non-native teachers continue to be stigmatized or racialized? So this is a rather large question. So again, to fight this myth, but it has real-world consequences. Native speakers are favored. Being native speaker is your entry visa into the profession, whether you are capable or not, whether you are qualified or not. So again, how can we, again, fight this and stand in the face of this? Because on the ground, it is there.
I think maybe one way to do it is, again, to displace or maybe to break the myth that citizenship should be associated with one's native speakerism. I don't have to be British in citizenship or American citizenship in order to be called a native speaker of the English language. I think through language, and many researchers and theorists have spoken about language as a tool for inclusion, right? So what happens in instances of unequal English is that this tool becomes a tool for exclusion rather than for inclusion. So although English has been celebrated as a lingua, as a global, through an imposed myth, really, lingua franca, or as, within the paradigms of world Englishes, we need to come in terms with the true reality that there are unequal relationships between the speakers of the English language. And the inequality of English remains a very important and a main characteristic of globalizing and localizing the language. So we're not just talking about English on a global scale, we're talking about it on a local scale as well. Like, you saw in my epiphanies, on a local scale in Kuwait, English was used to regulate power relationships between speakers, my superior and myself. So I think we just have to come into terms with the reality.
All
yes,
right.
sir.
I think time is up, but we have final two questions which we can do within 1 minute. The first one is for you. Okay, Julius, do you want to ask something?
Okay. Yeah. Just to add to what Fajar said, I think, for me, in my opinion, we should not abandon the ideology of native speakerism, because the person who asked the question was right. It has material and real consequences. I think the problem is not really, the ideology itself, but what I mean is that the problem is our attitudes towards native speakers and non-native speakers. For me, I still want to maintain those to maintain those labels, like a native speaker and a non-native speaker, because I myself, I am very proud to be a non-native speaker, and that's my identity, or so for identity purposes, it's very important to maintain that. The problem actually is our attitudes, preferential treatment, towards one category over another category. So native and non-native, we still have to maintain that. We still have to, don't abandon that ideology, the native speaker, because it's really real and it has material and world consequences.
Good. I like your compromising attitude. It is good. We need to come to terms with the reality. All right, the final two questions within 1 or 2 minutes. This is for you, Julius, from anonymous attendee. He's saying that is the ideology of half native speaker is unique to Japan, or this is everywhere?
Okay, yeah. Well, right now, because it's a single case, so yeah, we can say that it's only here in Japan. But you see, the school operates online, advertising itself on and through the web. And when we consider the flows in online spaces like the website, it would be hardly surprising that the half-native label becomes more widespread or further quantified. Like who knows, in the future we might have like a quarter native or other insidious categories and more quantified categories. So, but my point here is not to predict the probable spread or the quantifications of the construct, but I think it's the materiality of the half-native label which is in need of problematization.
Okay, great. The final question is by Yasmin Joel Santos, for either speaker. All right. Is it fair to say that the word native speaker is a myth and it's better to switch to first speaker, second speaker, third speaker, and so on? Fajar, what do you think?
I think Dr. Ali would be best at answering that, given his expertise, mashallah. No, but I am definitely against this dichotomy. I think there are spaces in between. In a previous study, I wrote about how, for example, hybrid Kuwaitis are not native or non-native; they're in the middle. So, like, how do you acknowledge, that in terms of that dichotomy? I see it as a continuum, really, where someone's second language could be their first, with practice, with incidental learning, and I know first languages don't really.
All right, maybe I can add further. Okay.
Please
Yeah.
go ahead, Dr. Julius.
Okay, yeah. I think we have to decolonize, all these categories, like the first and the second and the third, because it's really so hard to, to identify like which is the first language or the second or other categories, because all these categories, we have to remember, are very colonial. There is a colonial legacy to that. So I think, we have to decolonize all these concepts, so that, like we need to challenge and decolonize, coming from indigenous groups and all that. Yeah. So these things are, very categorical and very problematic. So yeah.
All right. Okay. Sorry. Just carry on with the last few words, Julius, please.
No, I'm done.
Okay, great. Well, I think, we are respecting our audience. It is now 7:36. Okay, Fajar, I want to say something.
I just wanted to say that I cannot agree more. I cannot agree more with Dr. Julius. And I think my only issue with accepting the dichotomy native and non-native is the fact that it has implications on the the dynamics, the power dynamics. And that's why I don't really abide by it, or I don't really subscribe to that school. But for sure, I definitely, the literature written on native speakerism is the basis and the foundation that I constantly use to debunk myths like the native speaker. So it's definitely a place for me personally. It's a place where I start writing. So I'm grateful for that space, and I'm grateful for the opportunity for me to be able to debunk myths like that and contribute to the research like that.
All right, perfect. I think, well, I must say thank you very much indeed, Julius and Fajar. I think that was absolutely wonderful. It was an eye-opener. It is a mind teaser. We all have views, and what you did today is only just, promoted these views. We made us reflect on our positions. I think every single one of us has his own views on the position, the topic, and we are important. We are educators. So what we have done is a great job, and thank you really for your excellent presentations, professional, personal, academic, and you are looking at it from different perspectives. Thank you very much indeed. Dr. Myra, I think we are done. If you like, we could just call it off. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Iklima, maybe last few words to remind people to please respond to the feedback form and to register for our upcoming session.
Yes, sure. Thank you, everyone, for listening. This has indeed been truly insightful. May I remind you to fill the feedback form, which was already shared in the chat. Certificates of attendance for today's session will be given based on completing the feedback form. So please make sure to use your name as you would like it for it to be printed on the certificate. A special thank you to our speakers today. And with that, we conclude the second part of the symposium. I would like to bring to your attention that session 3 of the symposium will be held on Thursday, October 27th, 2022. The registration link was shared in the chat box previously. I look forward to seeing you next on 27th. Thank you so much for everyone for attending this webinar. I would like to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, konbawa, oyasuminasai, and misa al khair, and inshallah we will see you in the next part.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.